Hi, it's nice to have you back. I want to talk about something that Elizabeth Loftus was talking about and something about Oliver Sacks was talking about. Well, he wasn't talking about it. I read a passage by him where he talked about it, which is false memories. False memories are two of the seven sins. They're the sin of misattribution, and they're the sin of suggestibility or suggestion. They're misattribution because we have a memory and we think it was a memory of our life, but it was really a memory that came from someplace else. And it's suggestion, and it isn't always suggestion because we can get it from just we can mistake a memory that we have for another memory that we have, or somebody can plant a memory in us the way that Elizabeth Loftus did in the video that we saw. This is important, and an example of why it's important is a story about something that happened in the 80s, well, from 1980 to the early 90s. And it started with a book called Michelle Remembers. And it was written by a therapist and his client. And it was a story of a woman who had problems, caused her to go to a therapist. That's kind of the main reason people go. And as the therapist delved into her background, he discovered that buried deep in her unconscious was a suppressed memory of being abused by Satanists. Yes, she was part of satanic rituals that just were horrible. I mean, there was animals sacrificed, and she was laid naked in the middle of pentangles with candles around and people in witches' garb dancing around her, and every manner of things. People flying around on brooms, the whole bit. Fortunately, once this horrible memory was discovered deep in her unconscious, it managed to cure her, and she got better and married her therapist, and they wrote a book and went on the speaking circuit and did quite well. In fact, became consultants because, lo and behold, once it was discovered in her, therapists started hypnotizing people with problems and discovering that satanic abuse was quite common. Not only was it was common and happening right now, at this time, right in the early 80s, in the mid 80s, there was a network of Satanists that were haunting daycare centers, preschools, using these children for lurid sexual torture. For instance, the most famous case was the McMartin Preschool, which is in a suburb of Los Angeles, Manhattan Beach. And in this case, they were doing things so horrible that you can't even imagine it, like sacrificing elephants and giraffes and having the children drink their blood. They would flush the children down toilets where they would wind their way through the pipes into a room where they would be sexually abused. The worst offender flew. And we know that this happened because it was reported by one of the children's mothers who shortly afterwards was re-hospitalized for her paranoid schizophrenia. And during the course of this very lengthy trial, which turned out to be the longest and most expensive trial in U.S. history, she drank herself to death and died of alcohol poisoning. No one was convicted. And in fact, in the vast majority of these cases, no one was convicted. two authors, Ellen Bass and Laura Davis, wrote a book called The Courage to Heal. And it wasn't necessarily Satanists that were abusing and torturing these women. It turns out that many, many women with horrible psychological problems like anxiety, depression, ennui, other types of malaise were symptomatic because of repressed sexual abuse. And fortunately, some specially untrained therapists, Bass and Davis were not therapists at all, they were writers. In fact, I had Ellen Bass came into a writing class I was taking and gave a guest lecture. So I've sort of met her. And women would discover that their fathers had sexually abused them through the help of hypnosis and other guided visualization and other techniques, and then confront their fathers and sometimes report them to the police. Fathers were arrested in some cases, and this came to an end when many of the fathers and daycare providers and others started suing the therapists. It was not something that psychologists and psychiatrists in general thought was possible. There's a psychological ailment called dissociative personality disorder, DID, or that's not the right, it's dissociative identity disorder, okay, where people have multiple personalities. It's usually the idea of multiple personality disorders. And that went from 200 cases in 1980 to, by the late 80s and early 90s, 40,000 cases a year. And then they went away. They just went away. Now, why do you think that is? Can you imagine? Could it possibly be that it was a fad? That maybe it wasn't really happening? Well, that's what we think now was happening, because the techniques that they used, where they would hypnotize people and use guided imagery, plant false memories in people. It used to be that they'd use hypnosis to recover memories for people in crimes. So a person was at a crime scene of some sort, and they were a first-person testimony witness, and they didn't remember things quite that well, and they'd bring in the police hypnotist to hypnotize them and recover the memories so that they, remember the whole thing very well, and then they'd go to court and they'd testify and lock somebody away forever. But as we researched it and people looked at it and studied it and did actual research, it was discovered that when a person is hypnotized, they are so susceptible to having a memory implanted in them that the merest suggestion by the hypnotist can possibly create a false memory in the subject. And when you get a false memory, oftentimes there's no way to tell the difference between a false memory and a real memory. And in fact, subjectively, there really is no way of telling. And I'll show you this, and I hope you'll be able to experience it coming up here very shortly. So, hypnotism isn't allowed. In fact, if a person has been hypnotized relative to first-person testimony, the testimony isn't allowed. So forget it. The person's brain has been polluted, and what they have to say can't be of any value. the whole thing with the witches and things like that. I mean, come on, sacrificing elephants and giraffes, flushing kids down toilets. It's astounding that anyone would even believe it. But I'm going to do a whole blog entry on it because I managed to find video clips of Geraldo in 2020, and it's astounding the degree of panic that people were feeling and the degree that they believed that there was this international network of witches, international, all over the world, and it had been going on for generations as far as Geraldo and 2020 and all these people. Oh, the funniest thing is part of the indication of it was Dungeons and Dragons and heavy metal music. Ooh, how scary. Anyway, I think that's, I don't know, it ruined a lot of people's lives, so it's not that funny, as Ellen Langer pointed out. I'm sorry, Elizabeth Loftus pointed out. I'll get to Ellen Langer later. She's pretty cool. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to have you take a memory test to see how perfect your memory is, because it always happens to somebody else, not to us. And I'm going to have a guest star, Brian Brushwood, and I'm going to show you a clip that came from a longer piece by him, which is called Scams, Sasquatch, and UFOs. And I'll link to that. I recommend anything that he does. He's excellent. He gives talks at skeptics conventions and tries to teach people about the kinds of mental illusions that we have that trick us into thinking that we know things that we really don't know or can't know. And I took a piece of it out and I have it. So what's going to happen is I'm going to fade out, and when I fade out now, he's going to fade in, and right away he's going to start giving you a memory test. So in the memory test, he's going to show you a list of words and he's going to read them to you. So you'll get to see them and you'll get to hear them. Then he's going to give you a minute, and in that minute you're going to write down as many of those words as you can remember. Well, in order to write them down, what are you going to need? You're going to need a pencil and a piece of paper, or a pen and a piece of paper. I mean, either one will work. And so make sure you have a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper right now, because I am going to fade out now.
All right, here we go. The words are sour, nice, candy, honey, sugar, soda, bitter, chocolate, good, heart, taste, cake, tooth, tart, pie. You got 1 minute to write down as many of those as you can possibly remember. Many of you find that the first few will come easily and then you'll hit a wall. When you hit that wall, don't give up. Close your eyes and try to remember, and you'll be able to remember 3 or 4 more words. It's important that you get as many as you possibly can. All right, time's up. How many guys think you did pretty good? A few guys? How many guys wish you had a second chance? Okay, well, I tell you what, we're going to grant your wish here. Flip your card over or find a new place on the scratch pad. I'm going to give you a totally different set of words. And by the way, we'll up the ante here, saying whoever gets the most correct will get both a trick deck of cards and the book of scams. All right, so we got a little incentive here. You want to get as many as you can. All right, the second set, don't cheat here. The words are mad, wrath, fear, happy, hate, fight, rage, hatred, temper, mean, fury, calm, ire, emotion, and rage. You got 1 minute. Remember what I said, some of the first ones will come easy. When you hit that wall, keep pushing, don't give up. All right, time's up, time's up. All right, pencils down. Okay, how many guys think you did better on the second list than the first list? Good, because you knew what to expect, right? I tell you what, look at list number 1. Look at list number 1. Raise your hand if you got the word sweet on list number 1. Hands in the air. Look at almost all of you. Excellent. Now look at list number 2. Raise your hand if you got the word anger or angry on list number 2. Good, almost all of you again. If you raised your hand either time, you have experienced a false memory. Because neither of those words were on either of these two lists.
You can plainly see that you're in the minority. But don't feel bad. Famous people have false memories too. And so I'm going to let you see one of my most prestigious guest stars. Alan Alda from MASH is going to be here with none other than the author of The 7 Sins of Memory. And he's going to show you a little experiment where I'm going to give it away. He gets tricked too. So here goes.
Start seeing bits and pieces of their life.
What I didn't know one pleasant morning while strolling with Dan Schachter was that in collaboration with my scheming producers, he was setting me up for a test of my memory.
Now we're just going to witness a simple picnic scene. And we want you to pay attention to how often either of the folks gets up and down. So whenever someone gets up and down, you just make a mental note of it.
Okay. I knew Dan Schachter to be a noted memory researcher, but this picnic was a surprise.
Would you like some pasta?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I love to watch people eat. Although Dan had told me to keep track of how many times the picnickers stood up, I suspected there was more to this little scene than that. But what? I wasn't to find out for another 2 days that the picnic was part of a carefully choreographed attempt to implant false memories into my brain, to make me remember as real things I'd never seen. At the time, it was like trying to keep track of a very bad play while sitting uncomfortably close to the author.
Ooh, it's cold. There's something on.
After 10 bewildering minutes, the picnic mercifully came to an end.
Very nice. Well done.
Very nice.
Well, it could use a little more high drama here and there.
Yeah, no, but it doesn't lack for slowness. It's good. At this point, I was politely asked to leave.
Starting with R.
The scene was played over for a stills photographer. But this time it included things that had never happened while I was there.
Ignore the sun.
Which means I also missed Dan Schachter's basic premise, that memories are malleable.
One of the things that we know about memory is that it's not fixed at the original experience we have. The way we talk about the event later, the way we think about it, can affect, improve, or sometimes change our memories, and photographs are one everyday source of reviewing past experiences that may have a potent effect on memory, and we're interested in exactly what that effect is.
Okay, thanks.
I want you to look at each of these for about 10, 20
2 days later, I was in Dan Schachter's office at Harvard University looking at photographs.
Get cut out, is it well-centered? For each photo, I'm going to ask you for a 1 to 5 rating.
Oh, see, part of me is trying to figure out what this is really a test of. I'd have to say, 4 to 4.5.
Okay,
You
let me
know,
get this
it's a
down.
nicely composed picture. I didn't believe this rating ploy for a minute, but I graciously played along, even when I knew the photos were of things I hadn't seen. I take it you don't want me to mention whether or not this was a picture of something that happened or not, because this never happened.
Right, we're not concerned with that right
Okay.
now. We're just concerned with your...
Showing you how smart I am. In all, I looked at about 20 photographs. Finally, the moment I'd been anticipating.
Fishing pole.
The test. No. The question is, did I see these things at the picnic or not?
Umbrella.
No umbrella, no.
Potato chips.
No, the potato chips were in the picture. Well, I remember them in the picture, but I don't remember them on the site.
Okay, so you're going to call...
I was doing fine until...
nail file.
Yes, I think I remember her filing her nails, although the picture is also vivid in my mind, but I think I remember her filing her nails, too.
Kite.
No kite. No, there was no kite. There was a kite in the picture, but that's it.
Okay. A man's cap.
Dan was obviously trying to confuse my memory of things I'd seen for real. I think he wore a cap. With things I'd only seen in the photographs. Well, see... I think he was wearing a cap in the photographs, and I remember when I looked at the photograph, there's something wrong with this picture. I don't think he wore a cap,
Okay,
no.
so a bottle of water?
Yes, there was a bottle of water. Uh-oh, this would come back to haunt me.
Folding chairs.
No.
No, no way. Pasta.
Yes. You think I could forget pasta? Come on.
It's over.
That's it?
That's it. It's out of your
So it had
system.
nothing to do
No
with how
more.
many times they stood up.
Well, that was just to get you to pay attention to what was going on in front of
That's
you.
why I paid attention to everything else. Now, what I'm really interested to know is, were you able to place in my memory things that never occurred in real life?
Yes.
By using the photographs. You did?
We
You
did. Even though we told you, you knew what the game was.
Yeah.
You knew that some of the things that we were showing you in the photographs had never happened. Despite that,
This is horrible.
one was the nail file.
Yeah.
That was only in the photo.
You know, when I first saw the nail file, there was this little uncertainty. Is that real or isn't it? And then a second later, I was sure I had seen it. In the final tally of 8 things that appeared in the pictures only, I wrongly remembered 2 as having been at the picnic, the nail file and the bottle of water. The photographs had somehow lodged in my brain right along with my memory of the picnic itself, and I couldn't tell which was which. To understand how this can happen, we have to first understand where in the brain memory is located. Is it possible to point to some place on the brain and say that's where memory is?
Well, there's no one place. There's no one place I can point and say, there's your memory for high school graduation, and there's your memory for having eaten breakfast yesterday. Instead of being in one place, many of us believe that the memory is kind of scattered in different parts of the brain.
The idea is that memory consists of all the bits and pieces of an experience. The sights, the sounds, the emotions, with each fragment stored in areas of the brain responsible for handling that particular sensation. So sounds are stored in the auditory cortex, sights in the visual cortex, and so on. Keeping track of what's where is a region of the brain called the hippocampus, which functions as a sort of index for our memories. Recalling an event means reassembling all those bits and pieces. It's not like replaying a videotape. It's more like shaking a kaleidoscope. With every shake, every recall, the pieces fall together anew, sometimes, as in my memory of the picnic, including bits that don't quite belong.
Okay, so here's the first list.
Dan Schachter recently wondered if he could tell the difference between real and false memories by peering into the brain while it was remembering.
Coarse, uneven.
12 people heard word lists like these, and they had to remember as many of the words as they could. Writer, gravel. What's sneaky about the lists is that while they're each united by a theme, they don't contain the most obvious word.
Bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, snooze, blanket, doze, slumber, snore, nap, peace, yawn, drowsy.
Sleep, doze, bed. There, right off the bat, I said sleep. But sleep wasn't on the list. Again, I'd been given a false memory. Bed. The 12 experimental subjects all got PET scans while doing this test. Recalling both true and false memories mostly involved the same bits of brain, especially the hippocampus, the index region. But while the true memory lit up the auditory cortex, the false memory didn't. So even though the subjects reported hearing the words that weren't there, their brains appear to contain no trace of the sounds of the words. So in a way, you really can look inside somebody's brain and tell whether they're having a true memory or a false memory, under certain conditions.
Under certain conditions, within this one experimental paradigm in a group of 12 people, we were able to see some differences between true and false recognition.
Dan Schachter emphasizes there's a long way to go before this first faint trace of a false memory can be turned into a practical test that could be used, for instance, in a courtroom. Meanwhile, discovering how easily my memory can be tricked was less than enough for me. What I think that this really brings home to me is it's very important to say not, this is what happened, but it seems to me that I remember this is what happened.
I think that's a very important lesson.
An interesting question you might consider is, why is it you think things are true? So you have a memory, it's there in your brain, you're convinced that it's true. Why? Why do you believe that a scientific fact is true? If you believe in God, why do you believe that's true? Basically, there's a place in your brain, a little neural circuit that fires off, and when that circuit fires off, at that point, you are happy. You believe something's true. It doesn't have anything to do with whether things are true or not. It only has to do with your brain and whether your brain thinks it's true or not. The last point that Alan Alda made, which is that we really don't know if we remember things, is a good point. And it's something that I said earlier on in the last blog entry, which is that we spend a lot of time in conflict with people over what we remember or what we don't remember and things like that. But the truth of the matter is we don't really have any way of knowing what happened. Our brains are not recorders. Our brains don't record things like as if they're disk drives or tape recorders. I really like what he said in that picture that he drew about how our auditory system will record some things, and our visual system will remember some things, and our kinesthetic system. And when we want to remember things, our brain in kind of a way goes and fetches things out of all those places and then assembles them together. So memories are reassembled every single time we remember them. There's a lot of interesting research that when people are in a bad mood, it's easy to remember bad things that happen to them. And when they're in a good mood, it's easy to remember good things that happen to them. So the ability for us to get stuff and put it into our memory varies. So we can look at the exact same memory ourselves, and depending on how we're feeling, it'll be different for us. It's pretty scary in a way, and it requires a new way of thinking about things. And the one thing that's I think is wonderful about it, and we'll talk more about this, is that if our memories aren't right, if our memories are for sure distorted in some way, that means that all of our good memories and all of our bad memories are somewhat inaccurate. And so if we have bad memories that are very painful to us, or ones that are painful to us, we're not right about it. We don't really remember what exactly happened. We don't know what happened. We didn't notice everything. We don't remember it correctly. We added and filled things into it to make it be worse or better than it actually was. I go for the better. I'm that kind of a guy. And it's possible and reasonable to take bad memories and, fix them up a little bit, make them not so bad. I'm going to talk later about positive psychology and especially rumination, which is going over and over and over and over and over and over things in your mind. It's something people have known is a problem for a long time. The ancient Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said that when you're depressed, you're living in the past. When you're anxious, you're living in the future. And when you're happy, you're living in the present. And so learning what we've learned about memory is incredibly valuable. And in the next blog, we're going to learn some more things about how we distort what we process and what we see in the world, and we distort what our relationships with other people. And it's a sin of memory. The particular sin of memory that we're going to be looking at next is called biases. And there's well over 100 of them. It's very interesting. It's one of the favorite things that I discovered in this journey. And so I'm looking forward to seeing you again in the next blog.